This is a HeadGum podcast.
Hello, hello. This is Fake the Nation, where we talk about news, we talk about culture, and where we go full mafioso and kill all of our enemies. That's right. This is the Godfather 2 part... No, the Godfather... No, you're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to say Godfather Part 2 podcast. A Fake the Nation bonus. And one thing I've heard my entire life is that Godfather Part 2 is the best sequel of all time. So at the end of our discussion, we'll ask, is Godfather 2 really the best sequel of all time? And joining me in this discussion is I'm just so ecstatic about this panel, you guys. It's incredible. A regular on Fake the Nation. You know him, you love him. He's been a writer of many television shows that you have consumed. He's also host of the podcast Yo, Is This Racist?, which is sort of like a spiritual sister pod to Fake the Nation. It is the wonderful Andrew T.
Hello.
Hey, Andrew.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
So great to have you, Andrew. And also joining us, you guys, I mean, first of all, he's just one of the better people to see live in your life. I get to work with him a whole bunch because he is the vaunted, the legendary host of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. It is the incredible Peter Sagal. Hey, Peter.
I'm just going to just bathe in that introduction for the next 10 minutes. I'm sorry, is it possible to stop the recording and just replay that again? Like an opera, like in the old school, Italian opera where they have to come out and make them do the aria over again. I just want to listen to it again, okay? Brava, thank you.
The great thing about a podcast is you literally can replay that introduction for yourself on your podcast.
I want to do it now while we're recording it. I don't want to wait till it gets posted. But yes, thank you, Negin. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's so exciting for me because I get to be very, very luckily on the show that you host, and I get to just bask in your many wonders on many, very often. And so to have you on this pod is just such a special treat for me. And to have you both on this pod is such a treat for me. Now, listen, folks, if you haven't listened to the Godfather 1 recap pod, go back into your feed and check that out, because this is part 2. And first I wanted to ask you both, what is your relationship to the Godfather oeuvre?
Andrew, please.
I will start. I watched both of these movies and possibly part 3, I think, initially closer to probably 10, 15, possibly 20 years ago than not. Right after I'd had pretty major surgery. So I was both out of it, and it's been a while. So, and also actually, I was just realizing my other relationship to this, not genre, but to this franchise is, I would say it must have been 9th grade. Someone got the novel of this book, or of the novel. Someone got the novel in school, and we read the first scene. And for anyone who's read the book, it starts out pretty racy, and we were all 14-year-old boys, and we lost our minds, and I think the book got taken away.
Okay, so this is a very not intense relationship you have to this movie. You're not the kind of person that's rewatched this movie 100 times. You're okay, pretty light. You're not quoting the movie all the time, I'm imagining.
I don't think so.
Not right.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, Peter,
I guess I talk about cannoli
what
a lot,
is your
other than that?
Okay.
That's incidental.
Okay, yeah. Take the gun, leave the gun,
I
take
have guns
the
and cannolis, but that's just a coincidence.
All right, Sagal, what is your relationship to this oeuvre?
I am older than both of you by, I'm just going to guess, relatively significant amounts. So among many other things, that means that probably unlike both of you, I was alive when The Godfather came out. And my earliest memory of it is, in fact, my grandparents, who at that time were, probably in their 50s, coming back from seeing it. And being...
What? Oh.
Yes, I know. So it's 1972 when the movie came out, The Godfather, the original. And I remember my grandparents being blown away, if you will, by the restaurant scene. Because that where Michael shoots Sollozzo and the crooked cop. And the thing you youngsters don't probably know, and I only realized it in retrospect, is that kind of like sane graphic violence was completely new. Nobody really in a major motion picture had seen anything like that. And so from my earliest memories, almost, this was like a major cultural thing. And like Andrew, I read the novel. I was one of those kids who would go read adult novels. And like Andrew, I was a 14, or when eventually I got around to it, a 14 or 15-year-old heterosexual young man. And the scene that Andrew references, which is known to every straight man of my generation as Sonny against the door, right? Was like, I mean, it's weird because if you read the novel, there's a lot of sex in the novel, but there's nothing like that in the rest of the novel.
There's no sex in the movie. Either movie. Really.
I mean, in a weird. I mean, obviously, you must have covered this intensely in your Godfather episode, which, as we speak, I have not heard. But there is, of course, a gesture, literally a gesture, to Sonny against the door. The shot where there's no dialogue. It's in the opening sequence in the wedding, where Sonny's wife, I think it is, makes a gesture talking about Sonny, and her hands, I'll hold them up. Talking about Sonny's death. And nobody knows that unless you've read the book and you know the scene, and then they have a shot with Sonny and the girl against the door. It's all fan service, you know what I'm saying? But that's, I don't remember the first time I saw the movie. I've seen The Godfather 100 times. I've seen The Godfather Part II less than that, maybe 20 times. I don't remember the last time I saw it either. But the point is that my entire cultural life has been suffused with these two movies for literally as long as I've known. So I'm one of those guys who knows, for example, lines. My offer to you, I can give you an answer right now. My offer is nothing. Your enemy's close. Yeah. You know, keep your friends close, your enemies close. Goodbye, Frankie Five Angels. I mean, this is like stuff I know. I have watched the Godfather DVD, the Godfather Sagal that came out on DVD, and I have listened to Francis Ford Coppola as he supposedly narrated or commenting on the Godfather, instead taking every opportunity to tell you how much he is Robert Evans. So Francis Ford Coppola, where he's supposed to be talking about how he shot The Godfather, he says things, yeah, well, we shot this at night. Robert Evans was such an asshole, and he told me I couldn't, it's a bizarre personal grudge. And then I watched the film, The Kid Stays in the Picture, a documentary about Robert Evans, in which Robert Evans complains about Francis Ford Coppola and takes all the credit for The Godfather being great. So, I mean, like, these are movies and a book which are like, you know, part of the fabric of my life. It's not so much I love them or I hate them. It's just they're there. Like, what do you think of wheat? Well, I've always eaten wheat in its varieties of my life. I don't really have a choice about it. It's not like a
right.
Yeah. So
okay. So I feel like you represent now. So the reason we did this podcast, and which we discussed in the first pod, was because every man I ever dated talked to me about The Godfather. Okay, literally every man I've ever dated, and then I couldn't figure out. At any point, if I had ever seen The Godfather, or if I heard about it so fucking much that I thought I had seen The Godfather. It turned out, by having watched The Godfather for this pod, that I had never seen The Godfather. It's just that I had heard every scene described in The Godfather.
By men to you on dates?
By men to me on dates. And the funny thing is, at first I thought, is this just something that's fucking happening to me? And then I remember, like, I started having conversations about it with friends, and they're like, oh my God, this fucking movie. And then it turns out that every woman who's ever dated a guy has had this experience. And then they made it a joke about it in the Barbie movie, which then cemented it as this is a very universal phenomenon. And then as I'm watching The Godfather, my husband walks in the room and he's like, can you pause it for a second? I just have something to explain to you. And he made me pause this movie 12 different times in just the 30 minutes that he was in the room to explain something to me about the scene I was watching. And I was like, wow, like you can't help yourself. Like you literally can't help yourself. And so that's why this podcast was born. It was like, I should finally figure out if I've seen it and then actually see it and then have a conversation about whether or not this is in fact as great as it is, or if it is like, it's like we don't question milk anymore. It just is. Like, is it something should we question? Maybe we should question.
Why are we drinking milk? It seems so odd.
What?
It's made by cows for their own young. Why are we taking it? I see the point.
Right? And so so let's talk about the opening of this movie, because the movie opens on faceless people kissing the hand of the new Godfather Michael Corleone and on the empty chair that is now his throne. But we actually get a twofer of an opening because this movie famously functions on two timelines. The other open is in the early 1900s in the dusty funeral procession in a dirt field in Sicily, in the town of Corleone. It immediately becomes clear that this timeline shows us the origin story of Vito Corleone as we know him in the first Godfather. And I should also note, so that the kissing the hand thing was like pre-title, and then the funerals after the title, and then the third open, if you will, after the title is the what is it, a communion, a first communion,
the celebration of his first communion of Michael's son.
Of Michael's son is in Lake Tahoe. So we kind of get this time jump into the future that the family has moved to California. They've really created a base there, and now this is what this is the great contact.
All right, I'm going to do this.
Started.
I'm going to do this for the first time of many times. If they're not in California, they're in Nevada.
Oh, right.
Oh, fuck. Sorry. Wait, Lake Tahoe?
They're in Lake Tahoe, but Lake Tahoe is in both. It's bordered by both California on one side and Nevada on the other, and they're in the Nevada side.
I had forgotten how,
Folks.
There
we go. I'm from California. That's embarrassing.
That will be one of the many, many, many things I explained to you during the course of this podcast. And now I'm concerned that your husband has beaten me to some of the best ones. So I want you to. Did he tell you about the oranges, Negin? Did he tell you about the oranges?
Talk about the oranges and the fucking fucked up way the orange is eaten in one of these scenes, like it's a goddamn apple. Which I don't know why I found that so offensive, but it was offensive to me. But one of the things that I thought was interesting about the opening was that the opening of the original Godfather was they're like at a wedding,
yes, and
it's fun. Like it legitimately looks fun. I was like, I want to be at that wedding. That's how fun. Minus the part where what's James Caan's name? Beats
Sonny
up the
Santino, known as Sonny, ever since he was a good child. Yeah.
minus the beat ups. I thought the wedding looked super fun. There was a bunch of I'm ethnic. It's cool. There's a bunch of just like ethnic like vibes to it, and a lot of dancing and a lot of loud people. Everyone's loud, and it just seems really like a good time. But Lake Tahoe in Nevada looked more like a boring affair. There were like senators there. It was a fucking, I don't know. So talk to me about the contrast of how this time jump and where we find ourselves.
Well, let me ask you this, Negin. Do you think that contrast of the opening family ceremonies from both movies, the joyous wedding of the original Don's daughter to the first confirmation of Michael's son, do you think that contrast and the quality of the celebration and the atmosphere and vibe, do you think
it's on purpose, obviously?
Yes. What do you think that might represent, Ms. Negin, in the back?
This represents hey, anyone else who studied race relations in grad school, it represents, like, to me, the sort of whitewashing of Italian identity. Like, there was a time when Italians were not white, right? And then there was a time where they distinctly became white, and this is sort of like, I feel like, represents that time. It also represents, Michael kind of like kind of moving away from his original, from his mother country and all that stuff. I don't know. I mean, Andrew, what did you think it represented?
I think that's probably, I should say I have seen both movies, but for this pod, I only watched part 2. So I'll just say right now, I'm unbelievably hazy on part 1. up to and including completely forgetting all the casino business. So I was shocked to remember that they are in, I probably assumed California also. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like the casino stuff was that strong. Was it that strong of a thing in the first one?
Well, it was not that strong in the sense that there wasn't a lot of the movie set out there, but it was an important
It's
plot
the
point
goal.
because the goal is they're going to move
Right.
out and they're going to become legitimate. We're going to have a legitimate business. As Kay, the wife, quotes Michael toward the beginning. He says, "You said that the
Yeah.
Corleone family would be completely legitimate in 5 years." And the thing they were going to do is get into gambling and casino operation in Las Vegas. And you may remember that among the many people who were killed on the day of Anthony's baptism, I believe that's the kid who we then see as his first communion. The first movie ends with his baptism. Second movie
Oh, that's right.
begins with his first communion. One of the people who's killed is Mo Green. Mo Green is the casino gangster operator, the gangster affiliated casino operator who they need to eliminate. And I feel I should say this for all the middle-aged men shouting at their phones right now as I say that he is, of course, based on Bugsy Siegel, who was the genuine Jewish mobster who is legendarily credited with founding Las Vegas, and the movie Bugsy is about.
Right.
And who did in fact get shot by somebody, and he was shot through the eye.
Yeah, right. And well, we hear that little story from the Hyman Roth character of like
Based on Meyer
and the
Lansky.
man-
Yeah. Okay.
Right, and the man who created Las Vegas was
Right.
Mo Green.
And there's no plaque to him, no statue, he says.
I mean, I guess one of my first major questions is like, in terms of the two timelines, is there one? I'll ask you first, Andrew, as like less of an aficionado like me. Is there, of the two timelines, one that you found like more gratifying?
Oh, I guess I would say probably ultimately the flashback De Niro business. Oh, you're nodding. I'm going to say the opposite. I think what you're going to say, which is that it has more thrilling elements to it, but it's a little flat as a story. It's just sort of like a straight line. You kind of see where it's going.
Right. It's like it's not complicated in any way.
Unbelievably easy.
Simple. Yeah.
So
right, yeah, it's a little short film on
well,
into
what it
itself.
probably is it's what like Don Corleone would have told the kids growing up without any of the bad parts. It's just like, I did this and then I did this and I fucking killed this guy and then I got all this money and ta-da. But
Yeah.
I guess it has maybe some of the funnier moments. So without getting into any later spoilers, there's one bit I really like.
No, you can get into it because this isn't going to be like a straight recap. It's more like a just discussion of a thing that everyone has seen a million times.
At the end of that story, he goes back and finally gets his childhood revenge. And my absolute favorite part of this is he brings his entire family to his little murder trip, which is like such a dedication to like work-life balance that I was really enjoying. Just like, this is, just maybe 2 trips. You want to see the old country?
Yeah.
Let's make a trip out of it. Yeah, like you could picture him having that conversation. I have to kill this guy, but like, why don't we like?
But
yeah,
you know, if you're going over, might as well. We'd have to get a sitter otherwise.
We'll get an Airbnb. The kids will run around.
It's so wild to me. It's so wild. He goes, yeah.
It's a little bit like Tony Soprano taking his daughter on a college tour and stopping to kill a guy, which probably was not accidental, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, homage. Now it's like, now I can see these things as homage. Whence before I didn't necessarily notice. But Peter, what's your feelings about the two timelines? Because some people think that one or the other timeline just shouldn't even be in the movie.
Those people are fools. Who says that? Let me go talk to them. No, I think, I mean, one of the things I did, by the way, to prepare for this is I went back and I reread The Godfather, which is why the Sonny Against the Door scene and my earlier feelings about it are so vivid. And you know that the early Vito timeline, everything with Robert De Niro, with the exception of the vengeance, I think, is in the book. Right. So at one point in the book, I think it's in the storyline after Vito is shot, we go back and we find out his origin story. And then the whole storyline with Michael, everything else in the movie is new for the movie, not from the book, obviously. Um, and I think that it's really, really important because one of the things that both the book and by extension the movie and Mario Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola and everybody was really concerned with is a particular kind of manhood and a particular kind of power, not political power or just like personal power. One of the things that constantly comes up in the book is whether somebody is like a serious person, or as often they say, does he have balls? And what they mean by that is not what Puzo means by that is not like, is he brave? It means like, is this guy going to stand up and do whatever it takes to get what he wants? And that's the quality that Puzo really admires. And the movie is about. It's one of the reasons why, among many other effects of this movie, actual gangsters started trying to model themselves on The Godfather, right? One of the funny things about life is like, actual gangsters are nothing like this, but they all kind of want to be. So to me, the idea that Vito Corleone could rise from nothing, from an orphan, his family is killed, who arrives with nothing. One of the first things that happens to him is he loses his job, could rise from that to being Don Corleone, the Marlon Brando character. That's what the movie is about. How does somebody do that? What is his quality of personality? What is it about him that makes other men follow him, take his orders, respect him? The word respect, oh my God. If you were a word cloud of like the scripts of these movies, respect would be the biggest one. And I think, The Godfather is about that to a great extent. Like why does everybody treat The Godfather that way? And then, of course, the primary story of The Godfather is how out of all three sons, Michael becomes the one who has that quality and thus takes over, that famous scene that I'm sure you talked about in front of the hospital where they show up and all the guards are gone and the assassins show up. And Michael
makes a decision, yeah.
And he makes a decision. And there's that famous moment where he's standing there with, I think it's the baker or whoever, and they're like, men are coming to kill my father. We have to stand here and we have to pretend we're armed. And the other guy's hands are shaking, and Michael looks down and his hand is not shaking, and he sees it. And we find out that Michael has that character, that quality. So the sequel is about how Vito had that quality, how he went from nothing to become the Godfather, right? To Michael's decline, right? Because Michael, we thought, had it, and like we said, the first scene of the movie is yet another big celebration, right? But it's not the same. Nothing's the same. Nothing is the same. Everything is in decline. Michael is in decline. And I think there's a significant reason why at the end of this movie, there's that famous shot of Michael sitting alone in the woods. In contrast to the first movie, where Michael is the new Godfather, and he's surrounded by men who are bending to kiss his ring, and the door closes. Closing doors, another very important image in both movies. But anyway, so there, you just had my the grand thesis of The Godfather and The Godfather.
I think one of the things that's tough for me about the current day timeline with Michael is that it's like he's already broken bad, and he sucks. And then it's hard to watch someone who fucking sucks for as long as Coppola makes us watch him.
What do you mean he
sucks? This movie is like 43 hours long. I mean, it's because he's so, it's sort of like that moment in Breaking Bad where what's his face?
Walter White?
Why am I blanking on it? Walter White. It becomes like you root for him for many seasons. And there's a point where he's just like, oh my God, this guy's actually just like murdering and stuff,
yes.
Where you sort of realize that he doesn't even have to do all of these murders maybe, or he doesn't, what level of power does he need to have to be satisfied with his need to have power? And that's when you start feeling like, oh, stop, like I hate you, and that's, I think, the feeling I had. That's why the origin story with Robert De Niro was more satisfying for me, because I mean, it also was funnier. You know, there's the scene. It was just more lighthearted all around. Even though there was murder, there was plenty of murder, but still, it was just more
complicated
lighthearted.
murder. I liked how like James Bond.
But it was
was
complicated murder.
Just like,
yeah.
oh, okay, we're jumping on a
Well,
roof.
there was like a scene too where he sort of like he had a sense of humor about his own power. There's that scene where like the landlord, he's trying to get some landlord to let his friend, his wife's friend, stay in the apartment despite having a dog or whatever. And the landlord at first was like, get the fuck out of here. And then the next scene, the landlord realizes, oh no, I was talking to Vito Corleone and he's a dangerous man. So he comes back to Vito's storefront office, which I thought was interesting. And it has a little meet and greet with him, and the guy is so nervous, and he's trying to, and they offer him a coffee, and he's like, oh, not today, you know what, I can't do it today because I've got so many things, and and he cannot open the doors. His fingers are just like slippery butter. He can't do it. He's so discombobulated, and it's really funny, and you can see Robert De Niro cracking a smile and his little henchman cracking a smile, because it's just like, this guy can't fucking get out of here fast enough, but they got what they wanted. The woman can stay. And that to me was funny because it's like him realizing, oh my God, like this is so fun. I have so much power.
Yes.
Peter, can I?
But how does he exert that power? You see, that's the whole point. He doesn't. So
Utter violence.
Don Corleone never threatens anybody, ever, right? Not in the first movie, not in this movie. It's always like, oh, I want to be your friend. Why don't you want to be my friend? Do me this favor. And then, of course, but everybody knows that if you don't do what the Don so kindly asked you to do as a favor to him and offer a friendship, you'll probably be murdered. And that is like that like both the book and the movie admire that kind of like absolute cool. And that's everybody's terrified of Vito Corleone, right? And Michael's problem is not enough people in the sequel anyway are afraid of him. And in a weird way, the entire movie is about that problem that he had. Somebody tried to kill him. Somebody wasn't afraid of him enough in the beginning of the movie. So he has to go and find out both who it was, and he finds out ultimately it was his own brother. Freda, you broke my heart. But he also has to deal with the fact that people just aren't afraid enough, which is his sort of failure.
Peter, can I pitch a question to you?
Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Question / pitch, which is you said earlier, you know, obviously anyone who thinks that one or the other could be cut from this movie are idiots. Could I pitch though? What do you think about, and this, maybe you'd like this because this just gives you more Godfather in an alternate timeline.
Right.
What do you think about the idea of making these two movies? Because I sort of think I would have liked to see, it's less that I don't like either of them, but I kind of actually want more, at least texture in both stories.
Mm-hmm.
Well, interesting. Well, first of all, I don't know if you guys know this, but at one point, and I can't quite remember when it was, I think it was maybe the late 90s or early 2000s, they re-edited the whole thing into what they called the Godfather saga, and they basically put it all in order, right?
Okay.
So it starts with the funeral and it ends with I think this was before the Godfather Part III. Well, maybe it was or wasn't. I don't remember. And it ends with.
I think it was so
after.
Right. So you can watch the whole thing.
Straight chronological, just like facts in order.
Right. And I find this heresy and an abomination unto God. So I would never watch it.
I mean, I think it was Coppola who did it. I don't think it was like a rando. Yeah.
I mean, he also made the Godfather Part III, so the man isn't perfect. But. Yeah, I kind of admire, just as a way of storytelling, as a way of contrast, as a way of present to past and past to present, because it's not just, this is how things have changed. It's also a contrast between Michael and his father. And, if you wanted to take away everything else, the crime and the setting and violence and blah, 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 it's a movie about fathers and sons.
Yeah.
Right. And a son trying to live up to the legacy of his father. So to me, at least in the second, the first one is very much about that. Which of these three sons are going to be the heir to the father? And technically 4 sons, because Hagen is sort of a son, and that's a thing that's more I think, overt in the book. But the second movie is, does the son, or can the son, measure up to his father? The father is such a presence in the second movie, not just in the past scenes, but he's constantly being invoked. I knew your father. Your father made us his Hyman Roth. Your father made a lot of money. And so there's people are constantly looking at Michael and saying, this guy is not his father. And ultimately getting killed because they were wrong.
I mean, I think one of the things that he's not offering, the big difference for me about him and his father is like sort of the difference between Amazon and Costco, which is like Amazon has a lot of Amazon has a lot of employee turnover, right?
Yes.
There isn't they're not getting the benefits to stay there.
Right.
And there's a lot of difficult working conditions. They're not allowed to unionize. There's no benefits, right? Whereas Costco there's a lot of loyalty. People love working there. Now they're both behemoths in the world. They both have a lot of power. But like one of them is a nicer place to work and the other one is a less nice place to work. And I think Michael is the Amazon, where he's got a lot of money, he's got a lot of power, whatever. He's murdered a lot of people, but he does not make this a nice place to work. He drives everyone away, and there's a lot of turnover as a result. You know, whereas Vito was operating a Costco.
What's interesting is that's an interesting analogy, and not to argue with you, but I'll ask you a question again. Who's the CEO of Costco?
Exactly.
You don't know.
I think it might be a hot dog.
I don't know. Okay,
actually.
which is not a great.
No, the point is that
National Hebrews hot dog.
One of the things about Vito Corleone is remember you mentioned a little while ago. You said, why is he in a little storefront? Because Vito Corleone does not need to have a palace. He does not need to be the guy with his, mansion. And, there might also be some contrast between Vito Corleone, who just, has this nice little house on Long Island, and Michael, who has this estate, on a lake. Maybe that's a mistake. Although I think that you're giving poor Michael short shrift here. I don't think Michael is as bad as Jeff Bezos. Is what I'm saying.
I see. I'm feeling, just for all the kids out there listening, this is a real nepo baby story. And what you really, it's not that we're not saying Michael didn't do the murders. We just want him to acknowledge he had a leg up in doing murders, just because of who his parents were, and he got started in the industry earlier. And that's what the important thing.
Yeah, well,
Let's quickly take a break, and when we come back, we shall continue. And we are back, and we're ready to talk some more. And one of the things I wanted to say was the other aspect about the difference between Michael and Vito is the sort of like the separation from Sicily. And I sort of mentioned this in the beginning, but I do think like there's that moment where you're an immigrant and you also always think you're going to be poor, so you don't behave that lavishly. Like immigrants famously will like have a lot of money, but then act like they're always going to be homeless, or maybe it's just my parents, but I don't know. Andrew, are your parents immigrants?
It's the same thing.
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of that with like Vito, and also he's closer to the home structure of the mother country where people live together generationally, and you're always around your family, blah blah blah. And Michael is really very much a first generation American. He's a different creature altogether, and kind of living like, well, we should be celebrating with these wasps and in like, and in tables with nameplates on them, like that's what you do or whatever. And like, so I feel like there's a difference there that we're also just seeing generationally.
Oh, yeah.
Like you wouldn't get a Vito out of Michael either way because they just grew up in different contexts.
Another thing that people talk constantly about when we talk about what we talk about when we talk about The Godfather is that it is certainly in regard to the first movie, and by extension, I think the second, it is like the quintessential immigrant movie. Yeah. What's the first line of The Godfather? I believe in America, right? Yeah. This immigrant guy, and he comes and he believes in America, and he came here and he looks, and of course, and then he asks the Don for a favor on his daughter's wedding day when he cannot refuse a request. So yeah, it's a movie about immigration. Yeah, it's a movie about assimilation. As you're right. I mean, what else does Michael do? He marries a wasp. Mm-hmm. He marries Kay. And in that opening scene, again, what happens in that opening scene? Pentangeli, the old school Italian gangster, gets up and he goes, what is going on? Why aren't you playing Italian music? And he tries to teach the band how to play some Italian song, and they end up playing Pop Goes the Weasel. I mean, and the senator comes in and he says, I don't like you people. You dress up as if you're normal people, but I forget the line, but I can still smell the grease or the garlic, right? It's
And
about
I
a
think he said, he said something crazy in that sentence too. It was like your fucking family or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
It was like, oh my God, I can't believe you're speaking to a Corleone like that.
yeah.
I
Well,
was like, dude, you're gonna get
Yeah.
fucking murdered. What are you doing? But maybe you're right. He just didn't command the same respect that his dad. I mean, no one would have talked to Vito Corleone like
nobody would
that,
have
I
talked to
think.
Vito. And what's interesting, of course, is that no one talks to Vito Corleone that way. He talks to Michael Corleone that way in front of his, his crew, his lawyer, his aides. So of course, Michael has to say what he says, the famous line. I'll give my offer right away. Nothing. Of course, you find out what happens
Nothing.
later. But yeah, this is a movie about immigration. It's a movie about assimilation. It's a movie about what you gain when you assimilate. It's a movie about what you lose. What you said, about Vito and how he's not going to show off his wealth and power, even though he's got it. That's about living in an immigrant community. Everybody knows everybody else. You're not going to show off, right? Because these are your connections, these are your community, and to a great extent, that's what other than fathers and sons, it's about becoming American for better or for worse. In many cases, for worse.
Well, Andrew made the pitch that this should maybe be 2 movies. I think that's an interesting pitch. I have another pitch, which is this should be a movie told from the point of view of Tom Hagen,
Why?
because he is not a part of the family. He chose to try to be a part of this family, and he has to sort of leap through a bunch of hurdles to become as evil as he becomes. I mean, I assume that Hagen is as evil as Michael from the scene where we learn that he probably orchestrated the killing of that prostitute to set up Senator Geary.
Yeah.
So there's that scene where Senator Geary is with a prostitute, and he's like, I don't remember how this happened or whatever, and it's clear that like this was a setup, basically, that the Corleones did it in Fredo's casino. And
that wasn't a casino. Perhaps you don't get out to casinos much, but that wasn't a casino. It was a.
No, it was like a brothel.
It was very much a brothel, Negin.
But I thought it was like attached. For some reason, I thought it was attached to a casino. I don't know why I had that in my head. But when Hagen sort of delivers the information about, oh, this girl, she doesn't have any family, it's fine. Like,
it'll be as if she never existed.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be as if she never existed. And you're like, oh, fuck, dude, you're like as bad as these guys, or you try so hard to be as bad so that you gain acceptance by Michael, and you're spending a lifetime doing it. That is a crazy, what an arc for a person.
I mean,
I don't know.
Well, remember, he's all. Go ahead, please.
Not to pitch on a movie that many people consider to be actually perfect, but that would be a wonderful opportunity after Fredo's killed for him to be like, it was me all along.
Right. Yeah.
No.
Well, was it him? I mean, was it him? No, it wasn't him.
No. Yeah. Tom did not betray the family. And in fact, the only reason Tom Hagen does not show up in Godfather Part III is because they wouldn't pay Robert Duvall enough money.
Right. Okay. So, by the way, this, Marlon Brando was supposed to make a cameo in this film, and does not, and agrees to it, whatever, but does not show up on the day of filming. Which
is why you never see him at the end. Why they stand up at the end and say, "Oh, Dad," and he's off camera. Yeah. Which I think is actually pretty good. It's shocking and good, just in the sense of like filmmaking and story, to see James Caan again at the end.
Yeah. It was shocking. Yeah.
And it was like, oh my God. And I think that's all we needed. And it's kind of, I think it's kind of cool, despite the fact that, as you say, they wanted Marlon Brando to come back, that he never reappears, because he looms over the movie, the mature Vito Corleone, the Marlon Brando depiction. He looms over the movie, but it's kind of cool that you never see that person again, that he's just there as like a spirit and a vibe and a model and a curse and a blessing, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, let me ask you this, Peter, because one of the questions I had was about Robert De Niro playing, trying to do a young version of the Marlon Brando character. My position in the first movie was that Marlon Brando was in a different movie where they were doing sketch comedy versions of mafia characters. I just thought, it's not a popular opinion. I recognize that most people think that's the best performance ever fucking delivered, blah, blah, blah. From the lens of 2024, felt like it was way too much. Why does he always have a wisdom tooth removed? You know what I mean? It's too much with the face and the jaw and the cotton balls, and I thought it was too much. Now, interestingly, I thought the the Robert De Niro performance felt a lot more like in the confines of this movie. It had a lot less jaw. But I don't know, Peter, what do you think about?
I think I can compare it to an experience I had when I finally saw a classic gangster movie called Little Caesar with Edward G. Robinson. And it was made in the 30s, pre-code, very famous gangster movie. And I'm watching, Edward G. Robinson play this gangster. And I'm like, oh my God, he's doing the bit from the Bugs Bunny cartoons. Because I had grown up on Bugs Bunny cartoons, which had a gangster character who was talking like this, who was basically doing an Edward G. Robinson impersonation. I had grown up in Edward G. Robinson impersonations before I ever saw Edward G. Robinson, at which point it was impossible to look at Edward G. Robinson, the original, without thinking he's
which is maybe my problem.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have grown up without ever knowing it or even understanding it, with like constant iterations of Marlon Brando doing Vito Corleone with that thing in his mouth. He's actually got a dental appliance. So he sounds he's got a voice like this, and he's like making off. You've seen that so many times that when you finally sat down to watch the original, it's impossible to strip away that in huge cultural icing that's been layered on to make it a figure.
Yeah.
You've seen parodies and parodies of parodies. But I guarantee you, if you were my grandparents back in 1972 going out to the cinema, and Marlon Brando, who at the time was still this incredibly gorgeous movie star, the equivalent of take your pick, what's the name of the guy, the Glenn guy, whatever, incredibly handsome, virile movie star. Glenn Powell. He's like the Glenn Powell of 1972, right? And you see this guy, and I don't see it. I don't remember how old Marlon Brando was in 1972, but he wasn't that old.
By the way, he's 47.
Oh, right. Exactly. So you have this guy who is in the prime of his, again, people thought of him still as Stanley Kowalski from the original Streetcar, right? This incredible, just walking, powerful, tower of testosterone. And here he is, this old man, and he's got his white hair, and he's like fatherly and grandfatherly. That, to everybody watching, was a revelation. That's why they gave him the Oscar.
I mean, so Robert De Niro wins the Oscar for this performance. Andrew, do you feel like he turned in an Oscar-winning performance?
It's a wee bit to me on the. I think it's so similarly. Like I just grew up in a place where it's actually impossible for me to have a fresh, like, I would have seen The Simpsons, Bugs Bunny, any number of takes on this before I saw this by kind of a lot, probably The Sopranos even. So it's hard not to see a guy that I know doing an impression of a cartoon that I watched. So for that reason, I will say, I
would say this is a lot less cartoonish than what Brando was doing.
It is on the quiet side.
Oh, he's not there yet. Like, he develops the crazy.
You know what? I was thinking, actually, given all the, like, in my opinion, kind of horrible prequel, like, rise of character movies that are out these days, I was like, oh, if they did this contemporary, like, if they made Godfather 2 in 2024. The whole flashback would have been about him developing whatever the fuck is going on in his mouth. It would have the final scene would have been like a botched wisdom tooth extraction.
That's because we have fallen so far as a culture.
We really are, right? And I will also say, he's probably the best looking skinny guy in a double breasted suit I've ever seen. That would be that's the part where I'm like, huh, double-breasted suit on a skinny guy. Okay, interesting.
Speaking of,
Yeah.
speaking as a not skinny guy who has attempted double-breasted suits, I don't know if you've got that correct, but at any rate, uh, I think part of the reason, I think part of the reason they gave him the Oscar, I wasn't there at the time, nor was I voting in the Academy, was because he did such a great job of embodying a character who, even then, I think 3 years after the original came out, was like an icon of
Mhm.
like American film. I mean,
Yeah.
if you were to like, I mean, anytime you go, like for example, there was a movie theater I used to go here in Chicago back when I used to go see movies that has a big mural right around the popcorn stand, around the concessions, and it's like classic scenes, images from movies, and there's Braveheart and there's Mary Poppins, but right in the center is Vito Corleone stroking that cat right from the opening scene. And the fact that Robert De Niro was able to give you a credible younger version of that character while seeming to embody the same guy is like, I'll give him a statuette for that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Also, he does it almost entirely in Sicilian, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it's funny. I kept meaning to look this up, and I didn't. Like whether or not his Sicilian sounded good. I mean, it looked like it sounded good, but obviously I can't tell. He's speaking a dialect of Italian. But now that we're talking about performances here, let's talk quickly about. And it's interesting because we'll talk about Lee Strasberg in a minute. But both Al Pacino and Robert De Niro are students of Lee Strasberg coming into this movie. So they're both like method actors, whatever. Al Pacino, now I argued handed in a great performance in Godfather Part the first one, and in this one, I thought he also had a fantastic performance. He doesn't win because in this year, the Oscar goes to like one of those Oscars that like the guy's old, so we got to give it to him.
Oh,
like
I think
one of those.
without having looked it up and not remembering, was it Art Carney for Harry and Tonto?
Yes,
Because
it was
people,
Art Carney too. Because also Jack Nicholson was nominated in this year for Chinatown and doesn't get it.
right.
It would have been Jack Nicholson or Al Pacino, honestly, if it wasn't for that Harry and Tonto
The
situation.
reason is because Art Carney is remembered for two things: for After a Wonderful Life as a Performer, for being the sidekick in The Honeymooners, and for winning the Oscar instead of Al Pacino or Jack
Instead of
Nicholson.
Al Pacino, it's so sad. But yes, it should have really. But the interesting thing about Al Pacino, is this kind of actor now, and then he morphs into the hoo-ah like actor, and there's moments in this movie where you're like, oh no, you're gonna do it. This is where you start experimenting with these like crazy
Like
like
where?
audio leap where he goes, they came into my house.
I
into
knew
my
you were
house
going to
where my
say that.
where my children sleep. Where my children sleep. It's like with their toys or whatever. It was like, dude, like that was a lot for this sentence you're putting together. It just felt like a lot.
See, if I could do anything for you, Negin, I would put you in a time machine and take you back to see the movie in '75. Because yes, just like we were talking about with the caricature of Vito Corleone, it's impossible to see young Al Pacino
Yeah.
without thinking
Yeah.
of hoo-ah and everything
Yeah,
else that's happened in the last 20
Yeah.
years.
But I mean, in the first one, he doesn't have those moments.
No, he
really.
doesn't.
I noticed
And but
any.
that
And this one, he starts
he
to do
does, and that is, I think that was calculated is the wrong word because it makes it seem artificial, but I think it was intentional because there are two scenes in the movie, and I had to be reminded of this watching it again for this, where he explains to somebody that he knows who tried to kill him. First time he tells Hyman Roth that it was Frank Pentangeli, and he's very calm. He says, Frank Pentangeli tried to have me killed because I told him he could not eliminate your men, I want to say the Russo brothers, but those are the guys who directed the Avengers movie, so it's whoever else. The Rosado, whatever.
brothers.
And he says that very calmly, very businesslike. That's the Michael we've seen. That's the Michael who says in the first movie, I could kill them. He's a dirty cop. We can kill these men. Very calm, very measured, never gets emotional. It's just business. And then the second scene is when he tells who really did it, who he knows did it. It's Hyman Roth, right? And that's when he lets himself go. And to me, that was great. I mean, what do you want to call it? Acting, directing, filmmaking, because
Yeah.
you see that everything else he's been doing has been very intentionally controlled, very methodical. This is a movie about a guy who's constantly playing people off against each other, and you never know exactly what he's up to, and you never know if he's telling the truth to whoever he's speaking to, right? And he reveals his true rage at that moment. I thought that was really powerful. And I did not, because I'm older and saw it before the hoo-ah period, it didn't play to me that way.
I will say my brain might be just rotted by procedurals or whatever, and maybe I also missed it because any explanation would have come a little later, maybe when I was zoning out slightly. I did kind of crave, like, to the extent that there is a mystery, a little more mystery solving. I think would have been, because I was just like, oh, how does he know? That's cool. And then it just kind of just happens. I don't know. I will just say I know how I sound right now, and I was not watching this as carefully as I could have.
Because I was watching it carefully, and there's some things that are like, what? Like, one of the things that is confusing, and I agree. I mean, there's certain things that you're like, who ultimately killed who? Like, there's some confusion there because they don't solve it for you, but they solve it internally for themselves. One of the things was like, Kay goes, Michael, why are the blinds open or whatever? Like, why aren't the curtains drawn or something? And then he goes, what? And then, like, they get shot at, right? So then you're like, who opened the curtains? And they sort of never, is it Fredo that had access probably to the house? Is it, hey, well, then because for seconds I was like, is Hagen? I don't know. But then also, like, these other guys, was Pantangeli there? What was was he around the house at the back? You know what I mean? That stuff is confusing. They do not answer those questions. And so, I mean, I don't know, Peter, you know better than me. Did they, like, fully answer those questions?
It was Fredo. It was you. You broke my heart. Yes, it was Fredo who either personally walked into the bedroom and opened the windows so they'd have a shot at him, or he arranged for someone to do it. Yes, Fredo is the guy.
Because also, Fredo, but we don't also know, like, Fredo didn't sign up for Michael being killed. It sounds like Fredo signed up for something more of a scaring or something.
He says he did, but who knows? I mean, he's begging for his life at that moment.
I will say now I want, like, just a sketch of, like, a, like, Charlie Day style conspiracy wall of someone explaining to Michael what the fuck is actually happening. So it seems like this, but it was actually this guy, but this is what happened here. I will also, we were talking about visual language a little bit earlier. Am I nuts is it just like, Peter, you were talking about, like, having the balls and whatnot. Is it just like little thin mustache means you don't got the balls?
Yeah, I do think I think I don't know. Wait a minute. Didn't Vito Corleone have a little thin mustache? I don't remember.
Yeah, he did. But in this movie, everyone who got the little thin mustache is like a weak rat, I think.
Maybe I'd have to go back and check the mustaches.
All right, yeah, good. Yeah. I'm pitching just a mustache rewatch. Listeners, get on it.
One thing, this may or may not be relevant to what you just said, but again, I just picked this up from reading the book again, is that in the novel, and this apparently was taken from real life mafia, that the term for an old school guy who's lost touch, who doesn't understand how we do things these days in the modern mafia, one of these old guys who's just fading out into irrelevance, is a mustache Pete. He's an old mustache Pete. He doesn't understand things. He just wants it to be the way it was, right?
I wonder.
So, like,
because I feel like it's like Fanucci, the Pantangeli and Fredo mustache guys.
Mustache guys, yeah. You never know. Yeah, it is certainly true that Fredo's mustache does not show him to, shall we say, good effect.
And this does
not flatter him.
This makes me want to find an old Coppola family photograph and just see who in the family had a little thin mustache. Because I do feel like a lot of Francis Ford Coppola's movies are so directly talking shit about his own family I just watched Megalopolis a couple weeks ago, and I was like, this feels like could have been a conversation with your kids.
I wanted to say, before we run out of time, I do want to mention Lee Strasberg, because he's the famed acting director who was given a turn here as Hyman Roth. And I thought it was such an interesting performance, and it was also such a shirtless performance.
Yes.
Some of the some of the choices, and he's not ripped. You know what I mean? It's like an interesting shirtless body to be looking at for long periods. But as we know, these fucking scenes stretch on for hours. So I don't. So I mean, this Hyman, I thought it was really interesting. And the most interesting thing to me about Hyman Roth is there's a scene where he's got his leg draped over a armchair.
Yes.
Yeah, I noticed that too for the first time.
Man, I could not stop looking at this
So
leg.
cash.
It was like the leg. It was like the fuck youiest leg that
Yep.
ever delivered a message. You know,
Yep.
because Michael's in the room. He's like, "Oh, do you expect for me to change my body language because you fucking entered the room?" Fuck no, says this leg. And it was so interesting because it said so much without saying anything, because they're watching as some sort of game on the television, and he's like, we're basically going to wait for this show to be over and for this leg to move, you
Right.
know?
Well, remember
and that
what
was fantastic.
remember what Michael says later when talking about Hyman Roth. He says he tells me that I'm going to be his successor, but he doesn't respect me at all. He doesn't, he's trying to fool me into thinking that I'm the guy. So, and I know that he's really planning to get rid of me, which turned out to be true, right? I think.
Yeah.
And so all of that's all a gesture of disdain for Michael. It's all quite intentional. Him sitting that way, as you say, with his leg up over the arm, him saying, "Oh, let's just wait for the game to be over before you've come to my house, one of the most powerful, supposedly mafia leaders in the country. You've come all the way to my little house, and I'm going to make you wait."
Yeah.
Right? That's all very subtle
Yeah, that's
gestures of
great.
disdain and disrespect, which Michael, of course, picks up on because he's no fool, but he doesn't act on because he, as he says, I can't remember who he says to what, he wants Hyman Roth to think that he doesn't know what's really going on. So he'll accept those gestures of disrespect because he wants Hyman Roth not to know that he knows that he's a knowledgeable family. That's another movie. Never mind.
Which again, but also, first of all, I love that because it is like in the PowerPoint presentation of reasons why Hyman Roth doesn't respect me. It's like leg, like college basketball game, like whatever. It was so clear, but also just like part of it is in terms of this like mystery solving. Part of it is like, why did he even? There's a little bit of a like needlessness to some of Michael's machinations where it's like, why did he even need to go and pretend blah blah blah? He could have like just at that moment killed Hyman Roth. Like some of it seems like Michael enjoys the process of being vengeful. You know what I mean? Instead of like he's not as
He's
strategic.
like a Rube Goldberg
he's not as busy.
fucking with people.
Yeah. Although he wins in the end, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Hyman Roth is desperate for exile. He's and he ends up being in command of all, So I mean, his victory is a hollow one, but it is a victory.
Can I just say, I will say, I read that scene through a too contemporary lens, almost the opposite way, in that I felt like I was like, oh, Roth is being the casual gangster as opposed to like the intense Italian gangster. And it felt very like, this is another way to be. And so I will just say, especially in the moment, and again, I didn't watch it as carefully as I could have. I didn't read that as an insult as much as like, oh, this guy's chill gangster, and Michael is absolutely the unchillest gangster of all time.
In the CEO analogy, he's like the CEO of Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah. He's like the tech startup dude walking around with no shoes, and everyone's having cereal for dinner or whatever.
Right. They're playing ping pong or whatever in the office.
So that is truly. I understand I'm wrong, but that is how I read it for sure.
You guys might have lost the thread here.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm not sure.
We didn't. No, but that does feel wrong. I think like the intention was to show disrespect.
I gotta say, Negin, in regard to one thing though, the shirtless thing. I mean, it didn't like I didn't note it but I think because I, unlike you, have spent a lot of time with older Jewish men in warm climes, and I got to tell you, God gave us all that body hair so that we wouldn't need to wear clothing if we did not wish to. Negin. so I didn't register it as anything other than
Oh,
all
I
of
didn't
my
like
father's friends in the gym.
and it's funny because it's also those scenes occur in Florida. You know what I mean? It's just like it's too
Can
perfect.
I ask? Can I
Yeah.
ask another question? Actually,
Before
oh,
before we
I,
before we sorry,
my
go
my
ahead, and then I'm gonna ask my last
my
question of you
quick
guys.
question was, or I guess comment, but more of a question for Peter, I suppose, which is it so? I was surprised at how big this gets, as in the Cuban Revolution and Senate like
Oh
subcommittee
yeah.
hearings. I was that like a big appealing part of it? Because I was just like, I feel like the family stuff is perfectly satisfying, and involving like the international, government
Element.
right.
essentially felt
I
weird because it's quick but
And
huge.
before you answer, Peter, I also want to point out that Peter has a very specific relationship
yes.
with the Cuban
Oh.
Revolution. Go
Speaking
ahead.
of speaking of sequels, uh, so to answer your question, Andrew, I think that was very intentional. I think that The Godfather itself, the original movie, was seen as an epic film, even
Yeah.
though it doesn't take on international occasions. But I do think that part of Coppola's and I guess Puzo's intent was to make the canvas bigger. And so they decided to base their film around three significant things that happened: the mob takeover of Vegas, which really happened. And if you want to watch, what's the movie? With Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci in
Casino.
Vegas, that movie. It's all Casino.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's all about that.
I just said casino because
And
you
the
said
second,
Vegas.
right. The second thing being the mob attempted takeover of Havana, which really happened, and the sudden and, to everybody but Michael Corleone, unexpected end of that with the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. And thirdly, the Kefauver hearings. Kefauver, am I saying that right?
I
Hearings
think
into the
so.
mafia in the late 50s into the 60s, which are, in the movie.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that was really intentional. They wanted to sort of show these things that had really happened, which, and that, of course, when the movie was made, not that far in the
Yeah.
past. The thing, though, about what Negin was referring to with the Cuban Revolution was that, speaking of great, I think, sequels that surpassed their original, I was the original screenwriter on the film that was completely rewritten and became Dirty Dancing 2:
Oh
Havana
yes, I
Nights.
think I did know that.
And in the course of writing my movie, my script, which hardly any of it remains in the finished film, which I had nothing to do with, one of the things I found out was that the Cuban Revolution was an amazing story. And there's a movie out there that I haven't seen yet that I think Steven Soderbergh made, but to my knowledge, that sequence in this movie is the only accurate depiction of what was going on in Havana at the moment of the
Right.
revolution, which is that Batista selling out the country to American criminal interests, basic and corporation. That scene where they have the table and they pass around that golden telephone from AT&T.
Right.
That really happened. That's a real object that they recreated. So basically, American companies were coming into Havana, and with the complete and utter corruption of the Batista government, basically making it into a rules-free capitalist free-for-all zone for American moneyed interests, including organized crime. And then Castro came in and took over and ruined all of it and everything. And
Yeah.
it's all there. And it all happened for real
But-
on New Year's Eve, 1958 to
But
59.
I guess what I mean is like as you're saying this and the subcommittee, all of these feel like movies. And it is wild
Yeah,
to
right.
see scenes of things that I'm like, there's so much more here. I want to see all of this.
I agree with you, Andrew, because the feeling I had immediately with the Cuba stuff and with the Senate committee hearing stuff, it felt shoved in to make the point that this was a bigger canvas without. It's like we didn't get very many. They didn't leave us many breadcrumbs beforehand to like indicate that this was coming, or like it just felt like boom, and now there's Senate subcommittee hearings, and it just felt like. What? Like, I don't know. You guys have other storylines here that you can like not artfully tie up or whatever. Not to mention the fact that there's like I don't know, 3 hours between we know Fredo did it and then he gets killed. Like, I was like, oh my God, kill this fucking guy already. Like, I can't take this anymore. How much did they drag that out so long because they had to fucking go back to, they had the thing and they had to do committee hearings and they had whatever. I mean, there was just, I part of it I feel like is when you give a director, and I feel this about every great director that's given a full, like, leash to do whatever. They're like, there's no leash. Basically, they say we'll pay you whatever you want. You get to do whatever. And then, by the way, Coppola asked to be able to direct something at the San Francisco Opera House or write an opera.
Yep, I read that too.
And then he also was he also asked to be able to make the conversation, which he then does. These were all part of the agreement for him to come back and direct this movie, which he did not want to do. So they gave him so much latitude, and I think it needed an edit. You know what I mean?
Well,
I know, heresy. Sagal is like,
you kids these days, your problem is your attention span. It's been ruined
really
by this
is.
tickety-tockety thing you like.
Can I say, at least the cut I saw, which I don't know if it's in every cut, the intermission card was such a relief. I was like, oh, thank God.
Intermission card is my point anyway.
Is it time for me to ask my question of you, Negin, which I've been waiting now for a while? So two questions, related questions. A, and we can talk about both movies if you like, Godfather.
Sure.
Did you like it? And do you understand ultimately and emotionally why every goddamn man you dated tried to explain this movie to you?
Okay. Did I like it is a great question. I mean, I didn't hate it, but again, I do think it's nearly impossible for me to watch it in a way that's as riveting as it was for the people of the 1970s. I just can't do it. And I do think I've always disliked when filmmakers take their movies to 3 hours. That always feels so self-indulgent to me. So there's things about it that I think that I have legitimate gripes with. But I can see, looking at like Succession and all the mafia movies that have come after, and The Sopranos and stuff like that, which I also haven't seriously watched anyways. But looking at all of the stuff that has come after, I can see how that movie influenced film and television forever. I can see how that happened. So I respect that about it. Why does every man... No, I still don't understand why every man I've dated is obsessed with it. I mean, I guess because it's not like they're film majors, all of them. I mean, like, and they're not obsessed with it because of how it shifted film discourse. I feel like they're just obsessed with, like, power and whatever. But I'm just like, it's like I dated a guy who was like a literal librarian, and I'm like, why do you give a fuck about power? And then you're a librarian. I don't know. So I guess I don't see that part of it.
I have a guess, and I say this as someone who, to my knowledge, and if there's anybody out there who I dated and to whom I did try to explain The Godfather, please feel free to write a comment on the podcast. I don't think I did that. I don't think I was one of those guys who was like constantly talking about The Godfather. But I think for a lot of people, a lot of guys, I should say, it's an example of masculinity that they want to live up to. It's a dozen different moments. It's Michael, as we talked about before, looking at his hand and his hand's not shaking. It's Michael saying, "I can kill them," and coming out of the bathroom and doing it. It's Michael saying to the senator, "Here's my offer. I can give it to you right now." It is nothing. It is today we take care of all family business. It's that kind. I mean, it's what I was talking about earlier, that the book and Mario Puzo was obsessed with this idea of balls, of manliness. Are you going to take this or are you going to not? It's being able to put aside, and this is weird, I know, in the context of a date in a game. It's being able to put aside things like women and family, right? And doing what a man has to do. Now, even as I say these things, I realize this is insane and toxic and awful, and probably why we have Donald Trump ultimately. But to a guy, or a librarian, thinking about his life as a librarian, Are you going to be able to go in? Let me ask you this, librarian. Will you be able to go into the bathroom, reach behind the toilet, and get the gun and come out and do what needs to be done? I think for a certain kind of guy, that it haunts all of us. Would you be able to do that?
And I have to say that, like, obviously we talked about in the last pod, the depiction of women is that there is basically no women, but like in this one we got a little bit of Kay and a scene where she's like, oh, blind Michael, you're so blind, it was an abortion, Michael.
An abortion, just like our marriage is an abortion.
That's a line. And also it's interesting
really
to hear
quotable. You should work that one in more.
Yeah. Oh, so quotable. And it's interesting to know that 73 is Roe v. Wade, and this movie comes out in 74, right? So it's like it's an interesting timing, and to hear that word, and I'm sure it was so controversial, whatever. Like that there's a scene where Connie and Kay are in, kind of working together so that Kay can see her fucking kids. And because Connie recognizes Michael as being too ridiculous, and so she arranges it so that, Kay comes to see the kids when Michael's not at home, whatever. And I was thinking to myself, like, if fucking Kay and Connie were running this organization, there would be so much more diplomatic negotiation that required no murder at all. And to me, that is the pinnacle of masculinity. To me, that should be the pinnacle of masculinity. None of this other shit. Your fucking handshaking and all that. Fuck that, all of that. Like, we should have conversations. Arrange a nice time where the mom who should have joint custody should be with the children. I mean, what are we talking about here? So yes, I think it's hard to I see what you're saying, Peter, and I think we should teach a generation of young men to look at it a different way.
I in everything that I said, by way of my guesses and explanation, I was in no way condoning it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. This is a terrible way to think of yourself and a terrible way to live, to think
and
that,
But I think it's also not the only example of this. It's like you ask most dudes, do you want to be Walter White? And you're going to get the upsetting answer most of the time.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
And yes. Walter White, like Michael Corleone, dies alone.
Yeah.
And yet, both those characters haunt the imagination of men. Yeah. Because yes, they die alone, but they had their vengeance, And it's again. Yeah. Now we're getting into like the deep reason for all of our problems.
I feel like that's a great way to end this podcast. But last question, briefly, is this the best sequel ever made? The best number 2 of a movie?
Well, you have to qualify. Like, all right, so are we saying that, is this the best movie ever made with part 2 either in or implied? Or are we saying that it is the best sequel in comparison to its original? Right.
In comparison to its original.
Right. To me, the success of this movie is that it is as good as The Godfather and extends and expands the world of The Godfather in an extremely, to me, satisfying way. So yay. However, if you only want to think about sequels that are better than the original movie, Star Trek II is better than Star Trek the Motion Picture. The Empire Strikes Back is better than Star Wars. I'm sure there are others that if I had thought about it, I can come up with. But yeah, I think that there are other movies where they were like, I think we figured out what was wrong with the first one, and I think we can get it better this time.
Yeah.
Andrew?
God.
I know you're not a huge fan of this movie, I'm guessing you have a list of other
gun
ones.
To my head, I would just say I prefer The Empire Strikes Back. But I'm a bozo.
It's so funny because obviously I didn't think of Star Wars movies. That was not what came to my mind. What came to my mind randomly was Back to the Future 2, which I don't even know if that's a popular position, but I really liked Back to the Future 2, but I also liked Back to the Future 1, so I would put them on like relatively equal planes. So there you go.
Be on an island.
Toy Story. We're getting from Andrew. He has suggested the Toy Story sequels, which are both excellent. I haven't seen Toy Story 4 yet, but Toy Story 2 is brilliant. Toy Story 3, well, not quite as good as Toy Story 2, but still brilliant. In a weird way, though, it's very hard to talk about it now in terms of sequels because we don't really have sequels. Yeah. We have IP, we have series. We have, everybody knows that the first, whatever movie is going to be succeeded by more movies.
Yeah.
In fact, at this point, they're making movies that aren't even complete. It's Dune Part 1.
Yeah.
It's Wicked
Yeah.
Part 1.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
that's on
whole,
purpose, right.
when The Godfather Part 2 came out, and I would be hard pressed. I'm not enough of a film historian to know how many sequels and how
What was
frequent
planned?
sequels happen.
Oh, sure.
But the expectation was when you saw a movie, that was the movie.
Yeah.
That there was
Right.
that in a very rare instance there'd be another movie about the same characters, but it was done. And so to do a sequel means you have to start in a weird way from, if not scratch, from a standing start, right? You have to come up with a completely new story. You have to the characters had an ending. Okay, what happens next? And the comparison, you can't really compare even Toy Story 2, which is what, 20, 25 years old now. You can't really compare to the time when this movie was made.
You know what?
Well, folks,
As you're talking,
yeah.
I will say, both in comparison to the original and on my absolute level, I do think Fury Road is my favorite sequel.
Ooh,
Well, wait a minute. So
that
wait,
I
see now
wasn't
now hold on.
expecting.
You
Fury
see
Road is
now,
great.
but you just brought up perhaps another contender for the greatest sequel of all time, which is The Road Warrior.
Right.
Because The Road Warrior, and that in terms of like how much better than the original, if you see the original movie, which is Mad Max, it's cheap looking.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
poorly made. The story is not compelling, and for an action film, it doesn't seem to have a lot of action. And then the complete explosion into the glory that is everything we now understand to be Mad Max and The Road Warrior is such a huge step
Beautiful.
forward that
Yeah.
that would have to be in the list. And of course, Dirty Dancing Part 2, Havana Nights, I
Yes.
think has to be in the pantry.
Absolutely, you have to.
Obviously, that's in the canon.
Just for taking out everything that was actually good about Dirty Dancing and showing you could make a film with the same title without any of the actual quality. I think that was
All right, folks, that is the end of the Godfather 2 recap pod, analysis pod. I don't know. Point is, what a wonderful discussion we had. And I would love for the people of Fake Nation to be able to follow you and all the wonderful things that you do. Peter Sagal, are you still on Twitter?
I am not. I have left Twitter. It is gone. Rest in peace. I am now on Blue Sky, although I am trying to spend more time with like my children and less time on social media. But I will post there occasionally. But usually people can find me on their radios or podcasts every weekend.
As you know, you can hear Peter Sagal every weekend on Wait, Don't Tell Me on NPR, a show that I'm sure a lot of the Fake the Nation listeners love and respect. So tune in to hear him there. And Andrew, where do they find you?
My podcast is Yo's This Racist. And yeah, I am on Blue Sky. I will make a pitch that I've pitched on a couple other podcasts. I think we can just call them tweets on Blue Sky. Who cares?
J'agree.
We're not calling them
know.
skeets.
I think it's just, listen, unless you're asking for a facial tissue when you have a cold, it's just tweets. Tweets is a thing. Elon
I
doesn't
agree.
even want it. Who cares? We can call them tweets.
Tweets. I agree. And I don't think Blue Sky cares. They seem to be pretty chill. They're
Yep.
they're the Hyman Roth.
Yes.
Blue Sky is hanging around shirtless with its leg over the arm of the chair watching football.
Absolutely. Folks, you know where to find me. And then stay tuned because we will theoretically be doing a Godfather 3 recap, which is maybe a recap that nobody is asking for. You know what I mean? Because everyone seems to really fucking hate it.
To quote Terrence Winters, who I think has the name Terrence Winters, who was one of the writers in Sopranos and created the amazing and underrated and underdiscussed Boardwalk Empire, there are 2 Godfather movies. I don't know what you're talking about.
All right, folks, I want to thank everyone who makes this show a possibility. That's our wonderful producer, Andrew McGuire. Thanks to Gaby Ultra for our theme music. Thanks to everyone at HeadGum. If you have any thoughts or questions or concerns or any other movies or TV shows you think we should bring to the feed, you can email us at fakethenation@gmail.com. And otherwise, we'll be back in your earballs next time.
That was a HeadGum podcast.